afternoon, everybody. As Stefania presented me, I am Felipe Garcia Fons, or Garcia Fons, depending on accent. It's an honor to be here, actually. I'm a bit overwhelmed next to the people who are talking here. I'm a humble arborist, trying to do some good work to keep trees, maintain trees in a good way, and help good management of our green environment. I thank SAG to have the confidence in me to give this presentation, and also to my employee, Krenkels, to give me this job and be able to learn and stay here with you now. I have prepared, together with the collaboration of some SAG members, this presentation, such as Andreas Detter, who works for Brudi & Partner, Paul Muir, who gave a presentation about this last summer. I was lucky to see, and Dennis van Goederen also helped me here. I am replacing him. Unfortunately, for personal reasons, he could not be here. Here it says Pius Floris Boomverzorging Veenendaal, but it's Amsterdam. I didn't know. He just WhatsApp me now, and I couldn't change it. So, pulling test. It's a great method to work, but it has to be done cautiously and conscientiously. That means that we have to avoid problems or dangers, and we have to do it in a responsible way and thorough way. The aim is, as I said, is to try to keep trees and to do it in the best possible way. The presentation of today will be about SAG. Sorry, I forgot to mention I work for Krenkels. I'm not sure anyway, but I just say it because I mentioned the other ones. And the presentation of today will be about SAG, telling you what they do, just definition and history, a little bit of the program for funding. It may be a small group, but it's a great group. I'll tell you why more in a minute. And further, I will explain some basics about the pulling test standard, the objectives of creating this standard by this group, what is the approach, some contents of the standard, and then just a quick outlook on where the research is going now in terms of pulling tests and tree statics. To start with, I will talk about the SAG, because thanks to them, I am here and I am presenting this. It's a great group of people, first of all. You can learn so much with them. I've been lucky to stay with them for about a year now. And it's very inspiring and a place to exchange ideas, experience, and knowledge. The translation for SAG Baumpflege, don't ask me to pronounce everything, is Tree Static Expert Association. It's an international active group, and it's registered as a non-profit association. The members of the disciplinary SAG Baumpflege, they have a lot of experience in the field of tree statics, a high level of knowledge, and they have several thousand reports behind them when they have carried out a statically integrated test, non-destructive to be mentioned, pulling tests. It's internationally represented in quite a few countries in Europe and Canada. And in Europe would be Germany, Belgium, for about a year now, France, Great Britain, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, Czech Republic, Poland, Austria, and Switzerland. Some recent events which I find very interesting, and most of you may also. Recently in May, there was a workshop on root detection. I saw in Jo's presentation there one picture of a tree rada is something which is being used more and more now. A few people, like my colleague Dominique de Barre, Michiel Mo, and Jonas Heck, were giving a small lecture on their findings, their experience, and their projects. Other very nice event that happened last year, and I attended, is in Trieste. It was for, I think, almost a week, with a few days for people from SAG and people who were invited there to join, and then an open lecture. And many eminences and people who are well known in the area of arboriculture or tree research were there. Stefania Gasperini was there, Giovanni Morelli, Professor Francesco Ferrini, Stefan Rust, Karl Niklas, Andreas Detter, among others. And then there have been many workshops since 2010 organized. I mentioned here 2021 Wind and Tree Interaction with, say, a few names, so it rings the bell maybe for you, like Damien Seller, Daniel Brüchmann, Ebba Delewig, and other names, very well-known people for those of you who are following the research, like Ken James, Professor Hans Christoph, Andreas Roloff, Rolf Kerr, Bodo Rück, etc. I forget many, or I don't mention some, but forgive me for that. Now, SAG carries out a research and funding program and is funding different projects. One of the projects which was recently funded is the, no, sorry, I will go into that afterwards. I get confused with my slides. So the objective of funding is to further develop the engineering-based tree inspection methods in arboriculture and urban forestry. Main topics for that would be stability and strength, wind effects, measurements of tree parameters, tree condition, risk mitigation, such as pruning and scabling. Other topics will be biology, tree biology, environmental services, arboriculture, tree inventory, etc. How does that come about? There are different types and forms of funding. You can apply for these fundings to SAG, or SAG themselves might invite people to work in research. And there is also prize and rewards for finished projects. All this research and work can be proposed to be published and sent to universities and colleagues, magazines, scientific journals, social media, etc. To give you an example of projects which SAG has funded recently or helped to fund, a very fancy one I find is this wind tunnel study on trees in groups, to study the exposure effects by adjacent trees. It was done at the ATAM, if anybody knows this institute. Another project will be the assessment of the likelihood of failure for dead tree torsos. We are working more and more in the cities now to leave dead trees, torsos, standing, but there's a likelihood of failure after some time because of decay or wind, and there has been a study done for this. And then trees as bioindicators for contaminated sites. That's also a project which perhaps doesn't have to do directly with wind statics, but SAG also invests in these projects. And now I will jump into the pooling test standard itself. The objective of creating these standards will be to support the good management of trees. I feel like I'm reiterating myself, but so share our experience and apply methods of statics to promote the method within the various tree care industries. We want to increase the level of confidence with which people can report and do risk management and take care of trees. The standard would represent a common guidance and a protocol for the SAG members to start with, and to share our to present our shared experience with this work. It represents also a framework within which the validity of evaluations can be judged. A reference for the clients, so they can look at it and see how this has been carried out. And it defines the approach for further discussions on the subjects within the SAG, but also externally. It's not meant to be a manual either, but a good framework. We, as arborists or researchers or scientists, etc., face a lot of unreasonable judgment and uncertainty. It can be from people from the streets, it can be from government people or companies, etc., and uncertainty because they don't know about the safety of the trees. And with this standard and protocol, we try to create confidence to retain the trees and to manage them in a correct way. An example by which the person who was in contact with me is here present. It was Jan here. St. Peter's Abdij in Ghent. Belgian people may know it. So there was some fear of that some trees may fail there because a tree failed in a recent past. And there were also other issues next to these, like casting shadow on the vineyard there, etc. So they wanted to have a test to see these trees were safe. If with a visual tree assessment, you may be able to say quite a bit, but with a test, you can give them more confidence. And I tested some trees, and they may stay, all of them. And according to the test, 2 of them scored a bit lower. But the reasons were very logic. One has a root restriction and root damage, and the other one was very exposed to a wind tunnel effect because the tower of the Abbey and another building creates there a lot of wind load during certain periods or a wind event. Now, the basic topics of the standard would be the following. It was this group of experts who started this standard came about in 2018, and it's an international group created by the SAG, and they came to 5 or 6 topics. If I put safety here as another extra topic, and there will be the competence of the expert to start with, the people who's carrying out the tests, how we go about the data collection and measurements, about the safety of the tree, safety of the surroundings, to take into account the analysis of the wind load, the evaluation, how you do it, and then how you bring it forward to the customer, the report. The approach has been, from the beginning, an engineering approach. Here, very schematic, I show these few parameters, such as the strength of the tree. It's not only the wood, but the canopy, the structure, the age, the place where the tree stands, and other parameters, such as exposure and shelter, etc. Another main factor will be the wind and the load and the expected peaks. And with the whole mix of parameters, formulas, and evaluation, we come to a conclusive safety factor. The pulling test, it's a static load. That is to say, it's experimental. In real life, you don't have a tree which goes like this and stays like this. waiting for the wind to stop, or the tree is moving, it's dissipating the energy, it's moving in circles, forward and backward. So it's an experimental, but this is taken into account when you're doing the pulling test in as much as possible. Schematically, we have our subject tree on the right-hand side with some decay on the stem, or you have a fruiting body on the roots, or you have roots severed by excavations or root decay. And we have mostly another tree which serves as an anchor point. In order to carry out the test, we use a winch with pulling cables and tows. And we use an elastometer in order to measure the bending, torsion, and tension and compression of the tree. We place it normally on the stem, but you can also place it on the limbs of the tree if you have the suspicion or you know that it may not have enough strength, or you see some weakness on top, on the crown. And we use inclinometers to measure the inclination of the root plate. Here is shown schematically how all these things are placed on the tree. Further, we apply a load by pulling on the tree, and this is measured with a force meter. The force meter is placed between the winch and the subject tree, which you are studying. Will I go back? I see people taking pictures. Right, time is up. Now, going back to the requirements and the main topics, I mentioned first the competence of the expert or the person who is doing the tests. And SAG considers that this person should have an extensive knowledge and skills on the visual assessment of the safety of trees. First, one has to be able to look at the tree and say quite a few things before carrying out any tests. Then the biomechanics of trees also has to be competent in this. Engineering, technical way of working. The safety rules for pulling tests. About the components, but also about the trees and surrounding. He has to be able to check the data, to spot errors, and to see the plausibility of the results. And he has to be able to communicate this is a complex subject, both orally and in writing, to colleagues, to the client, or anybody. And also, very important, the person carrying out the test has to have knowledge of how to manage older trees and veteran trees, because they may have different requirements and you may even not be able to test them with a pulling test, because morphologically they're quite complex and different to a growing adult or young tree. Now, in terms of collecting data, you have to be able, according to SAG, to us, to create the worst case scenario, because you want to give certainty to the customer that what you have tested is safe. So you look at what is the situation surrounding the tree itself, the wind, how it's normally the most, what you say in English, prevailing wind, thank you, direction. The aspect of exposure and shelter, what is the crown size, the shape, and taking everything into account, you carry out this pulling test. But you look for the worst case scenario. Another example here will be excavations. If you're carrying out a pulling test and you pull parallel to the line of the excavation, here you might not get a worst case scenario, because if there are roots, they might be still intact and the tree might be able to withstand the load that you apply to the tree. Instead, if you pull perpendicular to the excavation line, then the tree may have its weakest point, and then you can say to the customer, sorry, but if the wind comes this way now, is not in a good way, and maybe you have to fell it. Nevertheless, I have carried out quite a few tests when there has been excavations and the trees are still okay because they have quite a few roots to sustain themselves, and sometimes where they do the excavation, the roots there, they were not playing the biggest factor for their stability. But nevertheless, this will be theoretically their weakest point. About the collection of data, the position of the components and the sensors, it's very important. We have here on the left picture the elastometers, which should measure the bending of the stem. You want to place them on straight plain fiber runs, not when they're curves, because then this can give another figure which is not representative. Also, not over bark inclusions. You have this picture in the middle. You have at the bottom, it's not very easy to see, strangling roots. And then on top you have the normal fiber run. If you place the elastometer on the root and on the stem, you are not measuring that run of the fiber or a straight run. So you will get a distorted figure. And another example will be here on the right-hand side. You want to follow the grain, because this is what you're measuring. If you're crossing fiber runs, then you're measuring two different things, and it's not what we want. The position of the inclinometers, I mentioned here a couple of examples. Just as low as possible in order to measure the tilting, the inclination. If you go higher, then you're probably picking up a little bit of the bending. So you want to go as low as possible. Not to place it on buttress roots, but in between. And also, experience and tests have shown that the highest values come on the inclinometers, which are based on the x-axis of your measurement. So if you put them, the load, it's going down, like in this direction, you want to place them on the left or right-hand side at 90 degrees. But still, it might not give always the lowest safety factor. So the more you test and the more data you collect, the more certain you will be with your tests. The reliability of assessment, as I just said, it relies on having sufficient different locations. If you can change locations within your test, if your budget and time allows, you better do that. The more complex the morphology of the tree, the more locations you would need to have more data. Just doing one pulling test, this might not tell you a lot. You might have done something wrong. So you want to test as much as possible. As a rule of thumb, we say that there should be 2 test loads per subject tree, and with 2 root locations and 4 issues on the roots that you are investigating, and 4 locations for issues that you are investigating on the stem. Safety, very important. We deal with very high tensile loads. We're talking about 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 kilos, 3 kilonewtons, 30 kilonewtons, I mean. So you have to check the configuration of the components. You have to check that there are no defects. And if you see any defects, you have to replace them. And you have to check also that the safety of your surroundings is it's okay, that no pedestrians or traffic is passing by at that moment, that you have people placed checking, and that and the safety of the tree itself also you have to take into account. For that reason, you have to measure the weak points with the sensors metrologically. And for this reason, during the history of the development of this method, there have been set up thresholds that you can use. A threshold for the inclination is 0.25. You may even set that lower for yourself, so you have this margin to go up. That's for the inclination at the base of the tree. And for the elastometers, or the bending of the stem. We have a maximum of 200 micrometers as a threshold. But if there is a defect, or you suspect that there is a defect on the stem, you should stay up to 100 micrometers. So you don't have damage which is not irreversible for the tree. By any test, there are micro damage, but it's reversible. It has been tested and it has been seen, like when the tree is moved by the wind, there are always micro fractures occurring. But the tree is able to recover from all of these micro fractures. How are we with time? Almost there? I'm almost there myself.
You should close in a few minutes.
Okay, so just to say that the computational methods, they rely on the Eurocodes, but they're adapted to the dynamics of trees and wind in the cities. And we use also the wind speeds which have been studied and recorded according to regions. In the case of Belgium, we have these wind speeds that are expected during storms. So you don't use the same wind. You have to be realistic, and you don't use speeds of hurricane force, which may happen in the Caribbean, to do a test here. The wind load estimation takes into account also the individual conditions, such as site exposure, tree height, tree species, the shape, the crown, etc. You have here on the left-hand side an exposed site with a high-set crown, great height, slender trunk, and on the right-hand side, low crown, thick stem, sheltered. Here another example, sheltered tree between other trees and buildings. This will have an influence, and you take this into account. On the other hand, if you have a tree which is on an open landscape in front of the sea, this will have a much bigger impact. And also take into account that when you're doing the measurements, you are doing it for both, for the inclination, tilting, and the breakage, or the bending. In the case of Krečmaria, for instance, it can happen typically that the failure happens at the collar. So when at the base, between the root and the base of the stem. If you're measuring both, you may be able to spot this weak point. And the reporting it has to be clear for the customer and has to be verifiable by colleagues or by future reports. Just a quick outlook, I'm almost there. What are the research now studying for these methods? We have optical method of recording, researching on this, dynamic vibration analysis, and measurements in natural wind. Don't ask me what all this means, but it sounds promising. Wind load estimation, energy transfer with wind action, new models of gust response, and estimation of exposure through computer-based site analysis, where you can take pictures 3D, etc. And then for evaluation, they're working on extended control values, plausibility control options, and individual parameters for tree size. Just to summarize, this is my last slide, or just before the last one. For the standards, we take into account the competence of the expert, how we collect data, safety measures, safety rules, the analysis of the wind load and all the parameters involved, evaluation, and how you go about reporting. Thank you very much. I hope I gave you some insight and enjoy the day.